I am Emma Rodriguez, 22 years old, and I've spent my entire life being told that my body was lying to me. In my family, being sick meant being weak, and weakness was something we simply didn't tolerate. My mother, Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, was a successful cardiologist who had built her reputation on being tough, logical, and uncompromising. She ran our household the same way she ran her medical practice, with clinical efficiency and zero tolerance for what she called emotional dramatics. Growing up as the daughter of a doctor should have meant better healthcare, right? Wrong. It meant having every symptom analyzed, dismissed, and explained away before I even finished describing it. It's stress became her default diagnosis for everything I experienced. Headaches, stress, stomach pain, stress, dizziness. Obviously stress from not eating properly or staying up too late. My father, Miguel Rodriguez, was a high school principal who had learned long ago not to question his wife's medical expertise. When I came to him with concerns about my health, he would listen with sympathy, but ultimately defer to Mom's professional opinion. "Your mother knows best, mija," he would say, patting my shoulder. "She's the doctor." My younger sister, Sophia, 3 years my junior, seemed to have inherited our mother's skeptical nature when it came to my health complaints. She was studying pre-med at the local community college and had already begun parroting medical terms she'd learned, using them to support Mom's dismissals of my symptoms. "You probably have anxiety," became her favorite response to any health concern I voiced. The pattern had started when I was young. At 8 years old, I developed severe stomach pains that would double me over during meals. Mom attributed it to attention-seeking behavior following the birth of my baby cousin, whom the family doted on. When the pain persisted for weeks, she finally agreed to run some tests. But when they came back normal, she declared the issue psychological and sent me to counseling instead of investigating further. At 12, I began experiencing episodes where my heart would race for no apparent reason, leaving me breathless and dizzy. Mom checked my pulse, declared it within normal parameters, and suggested I was probably drinking too much caffeine or getting worked up about middle school drama. The episodes continued throughout my teenage years, but I learned to hide them, rather than face another lecture about managing stress. The most devastating dismissal came when I was 16. I had been experiencing severe fatigue for months, sleeping 12 hours a night and still barely able to stay awake during classes. My grades began slipping, and teachers expressed concern about my constant exhaustion. When I finally worked up the courage to tell Mom, she responded with barely concealed irritation. "Emma, you're a teenager. Teenagers are tired. You need to develop better sleep hygiene and stop making excuses for your poor time management." She prescribed earlier bedtimes and more structured study schedules. When those didn't help, she suggested depression and wanted to put me on antidepressants. I refused, knowing instinctively that sadness wasn't what was making me so physically exhausted. College offered a brief respite from the constant medical gaslighting. Away from home at State University, I found professors and friends who took my concerns seriously when I occasionally felt unwell. My roommate Alex never questioned when I said I needed to rest or skip a social event due to not feeling well. For 4 years, I experienced what it was like to have my self-reported health status accepted at face value. But even at college, the episodes continued. The racing heart, the dizziness, the inexplicable fatigue that would hit me like a wall. I learned to manage them quietly, resting when I could, pushing through when I had to. I told myself Mom was probably right. It was just stress, just anxiety, just the normal pressures of young adulthood. Now, as graduation approached, the symptoms had intensified. For the past month, I'd been experiencing new and frightening manifestations. My hands would shake uncontrollably during lectures. I'd developed a persistent tremor that made taking notes nearly impossible. The racing heart episodes were happening daily, sometimes multiple times. Most concerning of all, I'd lost 15 pounds without trying, despite eating normally. I called Mom 3 weeks before graduation, describing these new symptoms with growing alarm in my voice. Her response was swift and dismissive. "Graduation anxiety," she declared without hesitation. "You're putting pressure on yourself about your future, and your body is responding to the stress. Have you been drinking more coffee? Staying up late? Working on your senior project? I see this all the time in my practice. Young adults who create physical symptoms because they can't handle normal life transitions. But Mom, the weight loss. You've probably been too nervous to eat properly. Start taking a daily vitamin, get more sleep, and consider some relaxation techniques. You'll be fine once you graduate and this pressure is off. She hung up before I could describe the new symptom that frightened me most. The way my heart sometimes felt like it was going to beat right out of my chest, accompanied by a sensation I could only describe as impending doom. 2 weeks before graduation, during what should have been a celebratory dinner with my college friends, I excused myself from the table and collapsed in the restaurant bathroom. Alex found me there, shaking and unable to stand, my heart hammering so hard it felt like my chest might explode. She wanted to call an ambulance, but I begged her not to. "Please," I whispered, gripping her arm. "Just help me get back to the dorm. I'll call my mom." When I did call, describing what had happened, Mom's sigh was audible through the phone. "Emma, you had a panic attack. It's completely normal given what you're going through. Practice some deep breathing exercises. If it happens again, count to 10 and remind yourself that it's just anxiety. Your mind is creating these physical sensations." It didn't feel like anxiety, Mom. It felt like something was seriously wrong with my heart. "Sweetheart, I'm a cardiologist. I think I know the difference between a cardiac event and a panic attack. You're 22 years old with no risk factors. Your heart is fine. Your anxiety is not." Graduation day dawned bright and warm, the campus buzzing with excitement as families arrived for the ceremony. My parents drove up from home, Mom looking professionally polished in her navy suit, Dad beaming with pride. Sophia had driven separately with our grandparents, wearing her pre-med student status like a badge of honor as she discussed my stress responses with anyone who would listen. The morning started well enough. We had a family breakfast at the hotel, and Mom seemed genuinely proud as she talked about my upcoming job at a marketing firm in the city. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe she was right. Maybe all my symptoms really were just graduation anxiety that would disappear once this milestone was behind me. But as we walked across campus toward the graduation venue, the familiar racing heart sensation began again. This time, it was accompanied by something new, a crushing sensation in my chest, like someone was sitting on my ribcage. I slowed my pace, trying to catch my breath without drawing attention to myself. "Emma, keep up," Mom called over her shoulder. "We don't want to be late." I tried to pick up the pace, but the crushing sensation worsened. My vision began to blur around the edges, and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead despite the pleasant morning temperature. Something was very wrong, but I forced myself to keep walking, terrified of creating a scene on what was supposed to be my special day. We reached the gathering area where graduates were lining up for the processional. Mom straightened my cap and gown with brisk efficiency while Dad took photos. Sophia rolled her eyes at what she clearly perceived as my attempts to get attention by looking pale and uncomfortable. "Nervous?" Dad asked kindly, noticing my obvious distress. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The crushing sensation in my chest had intensified, and each breath felt insufficient, like I wasn't getting enough oxygen. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together to hide the tremor. "Just pre-ceremony jitters," Mom diagnosed without looking at me. "She'll be fine once she gets up there." The processional began, and I took my place in line with my fellow graduates. As we started walking toward our seats, the world began to tilt and sway around me. The faces in the crowd blurred together, and the sound of the ceremonial music seemed to be coming from very far away. Each step required enormous effort, and I had to concentrate intensely just to keep moving forward. Halfway to our seats, the crushing sensation in my chest suddenly intensified to an unbearable level. It felt like someone was squeezing my heart with both hands, and the pain radiated down my left arm and up into my jaw. The world grayed out around the edges, and I knew I was going to fall. I collapsed onto the grass pathway, my graduation cap, rolling away as I hit the ground. Through the fog of pain and confusion, I could hear gasps from the crowd and someone shouting for help. The ceremonial music stopped abruptly, replaced by the concerned voices of people rushing toward me. "Emma!" Dad's voice filled with panic. "Stand back, please." Mom's authoritative tone as she pushed through the gathering crowd. I'm a doctor. She's fine, just overexcited. Emma, stop this right now. You're embarrassing yourself. But I couldn't respond. The pain in my chest was overwhelming, and each attempt to breathe felt like my lungs were filled with concrete. My left arm had gone completely numb, and the sensation of impending doom I'd experienced before was now magnified tenfold. She's having a panic attack, I heard Mom announce to the crowd. She needs space to breathe. Everyone please step back. Patricia, Dad's voice uncertain. She doesn't look right. Maybe we should… Miguel, I'm the medical professional here. I know what I'm looking at. Emma breathed slowly and focused on my voice. But I couldn't focus on anything except the crushing pain and the terrifying realization that something was catastrophically wrong with my body. Through my blurred vision, I could see concerned faces gathering around me. One of them belonged to Dr. Jennifer Hayes, my favorite professor from the communications department. Has someone called 911? Dr. Hayes asked, kneeling beside me and taking my pulse. That's not necessary, Mom replied sharply. She's having an anxiety attack. I'm handling it. With respect, Dr. Rodriguez, her pulse is extremely rapid and irregular. Her skin is clammy, and she's showing signs of cardiac distress. I really think we should get paramedics here. I am a cardiologist, Mom said, her voice carrying the authority she wielded in her professional life. I think I can recognize cardiac distress in my own daughter. This is anxiety, plain and simple. Dr. Hayes looked uncertain, clearly uncomfortable, challenging another parent's medical expertise, but her concern was evident as she continued to monitor my pulse. Emma, can you hear me? How is the pain? I tried to speak, but no words came out. The crushing sensation had intensified beyond anything I could have imagined, and dark spots were dancing across my vision. I was vaguely aware that more people were gathering, their voices rising in concern, but Mom's authoritative presence seemed to be keeping any medical intervention at bay. Give her space, Mom commanded. She needs air. This is a textbook panic attack exacerbated by public attention. Emma, focus on my voice and breathe slowly. Sophia appeared beside her, nodding knowledgeably. She's been super stressed about graduation and starting her new job. She's probably been building this up in her mind for weeks. Everyone experiences transition anxiety, Mom continued, addressing the growing crowd with professional confidence. What Emma needs is calm, quiet support, not drama and emergency services for a panic attack. But Dr. Hayes wasn't convinced. She leaned closer, studying my face with growing alarm. Her lips are starting to look blue, she said quietly to Mom. And her breathing is becoming very shallow. Are you sure we shouldn't… Dr. Hayes, I appreciate your concern, but I'm her mother and a physician. I know my daughter's patterns. She's done this before, though never quite so dramatically. Emma needs to learn that she can't get attention by creating medical crises that don't exist. The accusation that I was somehow orchestrating this for attention would have stung if I could have processed it, but all my awareness had narrowed to the overwhelming physical crisis happening in my body. The pain in my chest felt like someone was driving a stake through my heart, and each breath was becoming more difficult than the last. Through the fog of pain, I heard a new voice, one of the university EMTs who had been stationed at graduation, in case of emergencies. What's the situation here? Anxiety attack, Mom replied immediately. My daughter is overwhelmed by graduation stress. She'll be fine with some calm and quiet. The EMT knelt beside me, his trained eyes taking in my appearance with professional assessment. Miss, can you tell me where you're feeling pain? I managed to raise my left hand weakly toward my chest, unable to form words but desperate to communicate that something was seriously wrong. Pain scale of 1 to 10? He asked. I held up 10 fingers, then clenched my hands into fists repeatedly, trying to convey that it was beyond that scale. The EMT's expression grew more serious. Ma'am, he addressed Mom, I'd like to get some vitals and maybe transport to the hospital for evaluation. Her presentation is concerning. Absolutely not, Mom replied firmly. As I've explained to everyone here, this is an anxiety attack. Taking her to the hospital will only reinforce her belief that there's something physically wrong and make the psychological component worse. What she needs is to calm down and learn coping mechanisms. But her symptoms are textbook panic, attack symptoms, chest pain, racing heart, difficulty breathing, sense of impending doom, all classic anxiety presentations that can feel very real to the person experiencing them. The EMT looked conflicted, clearly torn between his training and the authoritative presence of a medical professional who happened to be the patient's mother. "If you're sure, I am absolutely sure," Mom stated with finality. Meanwhile, I was losing the battle to remain conscious. The crushing pain had become so severe that I could no longer distinguish between my chest, arm, and jaw. It all felt like one continuous region of agony. My vision was tunneling, the concerned faces around me receding into darkness. The last thing I remembered was the sound of Mom's voice, still confident and dismissive. "She'll be fine in a few minutes. This always passes. Emma just needs to learn that she can't solve every problem by having a medical emergency." Then darkness claimed me entirely. I have no memory of the next several hours. According to witnesses, I remained unconscious on the graduation lawn for nearly 2 minutes before Alex, who had been watching from the audience, came running over and began arguing with my mother. "Something is really wrong with her," Alex insisted. "This isn't anxiety. I've seen Emma anxious, and this isn't it." "Young lady, I don't know who you are, but I'm her mother and a physician," Mom began. "I'm her roommate, and I'm calling 911, Alex interrupted, pulling out her phone. "If you call an ambulance for a panic attack, you'll be wasting emergency resources and potentially putting my daughter on a psychiatric hold that could affect her future career prospects," Mom warned. But Alex was already dialing, describing my symptoms to the dispatcher with the clarity of someone who had witnessed my distress for weeks and recognized that this was far beyond normal anxiety. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes, and their assessment was immediate and alarming. My blood pressure was dangerously high, my heart rhythm was severely irregular, and my oxygen saturation was dropping. Despite Mom's continued insistence that this was a psychiatric emergency, they began treating it as a cardiac event. "We're transporting to Memorial Hospital," the lead paramedic announced as they loaded me onto a stretcher. "This is completely unnecessary," Mom protested, but her professional confidence was beginning to crack as she watched the paramedics work with obvious urgency. "Ma'am, your daughter is showing signs of cardiac distress that could be life-threatening. We need to get her to a cardiac unit immediately." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across Mom's face, but she quickly recovered, addressing the paramedics with renewed authority. "I'm Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, cardiology. I'll follow in my car and speak with the attending physician about my daughter's psychiatric history." The ambulance ride passed in fragments of consciousness. I was vaguely aware of monitors beeping, IV lines being started, and urgent voices discussing medical terms I couldn't quite grasp through the haze of pain and medication. At one point, I heard one of the paramedics radio ahead to the hospital. 22-year-old female, possible STEMI, vitals unstable, ETA 4 minutes. STEMI. Even through my confusion, I knew that term from listening to Mom discuss her patients. ST elevation myocardial infarction, heart attack, but that was impossible. I was 22 years old with no risk factors. Mom had said so herself. The emergency room at Memorial Hospital erupted into controlled chaos when we arrived. A team of doctors and nurses surrounded my stretcher, calling out numbers and medical terms as they rushed me into a trauma bay. Someone cut away my graduation dress, attaching electrodes to my chest, while others started additional IV lines and drew blood for tests. "Get me a 12-lead EKG stat," a voice commanded, "and call cardiology. This looks like an anterior STEMI in a 22-year-old. Through the medical activity surrounding me, I could hear Mom's voice in the hallway, speaking with someone in authoritative tones. "I'm Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, cardiology at Regional Medical Center. The patient is my daughter, and I need to speak with whoever is treating her. She has a history of severe anxiety and panic attacks. This presentation is consistent with her psychiatric issues, not a cardiac event." But the ER staff was treating this as exactly what it appeared to be: a heart attack in a young woman. The EKG confirmed what they had suspected. I was having a massive heart attack, with complete blockage of a major coronary artery. The damage to my heart muscle was already significant and would become irreversible without immediate intervention. Dr. Sarah Chen, the interventional cardiologist on call, studied my EKG and cardiac enzymes with growing concern. At 22, I was among the youngest heart attack patients she had ever treated. But the evidence was undeniable. This was a genuine cardiac emergency that required immediate intervention. "We need to get her to the cath lab right now," Dr. Chen announced. "She's having a massive anterior wall MI. Every minute we delay increases the permanent damage to her heart." "Dr. Chen," Mom's voice as she entered the trauma bay. "I'm Patricia Rodriguez, cardiology at Regional. This is my daughter, and I think there's been a misunderstanding. She has severe anxiety disorder and has been under tremendous stress. Her symptoms are consistent with panic disorder, not cardiac pathology." Dr. Chen looked up from my chart, her expression professional, but firm. "Dr. Rodriguez, I understand your concern, but your daughter's EKG shows classic signs of ST elevation MI, and her cardiac enzymes are significantly elevated. This is definitely a heart attack, not anxiety." "That's impossible," Mom replied, but her voice carried less certainty than it had earlier. "She's 22 years old with no risk factors. She doesn't smoke, she's not overweight, no family history of early cardiac disease. Young women don't have heart attacks." "Actually, they do," Dr. Chen replied gently but firmly. "It's rare, but it happens. And when it does, the underlying cause is often something we don't initially suspect. We need to get her to the cath lab immediately to restore blood flow to her heart muscle." "I want a second opinion," Mom demanded. "I want to speak with your chief of cardiology." "Dr. Rodriguez, with respect, every minute we delay is permanent damage to your daughter's heart. You can speak with whomever you'd like after we've treated the heart attack that is currently in progress." As they rushed me toward the cardiac catheterization lab, I caught a glimpse of my family in the hallway. Dad looked terrified, his usual calm demeanor shattered by the medical crisis unfolding around his daughter. Sophia stood beside him, her pre-med confidence nowhere to be seen as she watched the cardiac team wheel me past. But it was Grandma Rodriguez's face that stayed with me. She looked directly into my eyes with an expression that seemed to say, "I believe you, mija. I always believed you." The cardiac catheterization procedure revealed what no one had expected, especially not Mom. I had a rare genetic condition called fibromuscular dysplasia, which had caused spontaneous dissection of my coronary artery. The condition affects the development of artery walls, making them prone to sudden tears that can block blood flow. It strikes young women with no warning and no traditional risk factors. In other words, I had been having genuine cardiac symptoms for years. The racing heart, the chest pain, the episodes of dizziness and impending doom, as my coronary artery gradually developed the weakness that would eventually lead to complete dissection and heart attack. Every symptom I had reported to Mom had been real. Every dismissal of my concerns had delayed diagnosis of a serious and potentially fatal condition. The anxiety she had diagnosed was actually my heart struggling to function with compromised blood flow. Dr. Chen was able to restore blood flow to my heart through emergency angioplasty, but not before significant damage had occurred. The delay in diagnosis and treatment, caused partly by the dismissal of my symptoms over the years, and partly by the assumption that anxiety was the more likely explanation for a young woman's cardiac complaints, had allowed permanent scarring to develop in my heart muscle. "Your daughter will recover," Dr. Chen explained to my family after the procedure, "but she'll have some permanent reduction in heart function due to the extent of the heart attack. If this condition had been recognized and treated earlier, or if she had received immediate treatment when symptoms began this morning, the outcome would have been much better." The silence in the cardiac waiting room was profound. Dad sat with his head in his hands, processing the reality that his daughter had nearly died while being told her symptoms weren't real. Sophia stared at the floor, her medical training clearly insufficient to reconcile what had just happened with her previous certainty about my attention-seeking behavior. But it was Mom's reaction that was most striking. The physician who had built her career on diagnostic confidence, who had dismissed her daughter's cardiac symptoms as psychiatric complaints, sat in stunned silence as the evidence of her catastrophic misdiagnosis became undeniable. "How long has she been symptomatic?" Dr. Chen asked, reviewing notes from the ER staff who had interviewed Alex and other witnesses. "She's been complaining about heart palpitations and chest pain for years," Sophia admitted quietly. "But Mom always said it was stress." Dr. Chen's expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see her processing the implications. Fibromuscular dysplasia often presents with symptoms years before a major event. The racing heart, chest discomfort, episodes of shortness of breath. These would all be consistent with progressive coronary involvement. Are you saying all those times she said she felt sick, she really was sick? Dad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't speak to every incident, Dr. Chen replied diplomatically, but the cardiac symptoms she's been experiencing are definitely real and related to this condition. Young women with chest pain are often misdiagnosed because heart disease is considered unlikely in this population. Unfortunately, that can lead to delayed recognition of serious conditions. The weight of this revelation settled over my family like a heavy blanket. Years of dismissal, of being told I was too sensitive or anxious or dramatic, suddenly took on a different meaning. I had been trying to tell them that something was wrong with my heart, and I had been right all along. When I woke up in SIR, the cardiac ICU 12 hours later, my first sensation was relief that breathing no longer felt like an impossible task. The crushing chest pain was gone, replaced by the duller ache of surgical incisions and bruised ribs from CPR. Monitors beeped steadily around me, displaying heart rhythms that were finally stable. Alex was asleep in a chair beside my bed, still, wearing her graduation dress from the ceremony that had been interrupted by my medical emergency. When she stirred and saw me looking at her, tears immediately filled her eyes. Thank God, she whispered, reaching for my hand. I was so scared we were going to lose you. What happened? I managed to ask, my voice rough from the breathing tube that had been removed. Alex explained what she had witnessed after I collapsed. Mom's insistence that it was anxiety, the delayed response, the paramedics' urgent treatment, and the discovery that I had actually been having a massive heart attack caused by a rare genetic condition. Your mom? Alex said carefully. She's been sitting outside your room since yesterday. She looks different. Shaken up. A few minutes later, the door opened quietly and Mom entered. She looked older than she had just 2 days ago, her professional composure replaced by something I had never seen in her before. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. Emma, she said, stopping at the foot of my bed. How are you feeling? Tired, I replied honestly. But better. She nodded, then stood there silently for several long moments, clearly struggling with what to say next. The doctors explained your condition, she finally continued. Fibromuscular dysplasia. It's something I should have considered, should have investigated when you kept reporting cardiac symptoms. I waited, unsure where this was going. Was wrong, she said, the words clearly difficult for her to speak. Not just about yesterday, about all of it. The symptoms you've been having for years, they were real. They were your heart trying to tell us that something was seriously wrong. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more acknowledgement than she had ever given me. Dr. Chen says you'll need ongoing cardiac care, Mom continued. Medications, lifestyle, modifications, regular monitoring. I'd like to transfer your care to my colleague at Regional. He specializes in young adult cardiology and has experience with fibromuscular dysplasia. I considered this offer carefully. Having Mom arrange my care would certainly ensure I got excellent treatment, but it would also mean continuing to have her involved in managing my health concerns. I think I'd prefer to stay here at Memorial, I said finally. Dr. Chen and her team saved my life. I trust them. Mom looked hurt but nodded. Of course, that's your choice. Dad and Sophia visited later that day, both visibly shaken by the events of the past 48 hours. Dad hugged me carefully, mindful of the IV lines and monitors, tears in his eyes as he apologized for not advocating for me more strongly over the years. I should have pushed harder when you kept saying something was wrong, he said. I should have trusted your instincts instead of just deferring to medical authority. Sophia's apology was more complex. Her pre-med training had given her just enough knowledge to parrot medical dismissals without the experience to recognize when those dismissals might be wrong. I thought I was being scientific, she admitted, using what I'd learned in my classes to support Mom's diagnoses. I didn't realize that I was missing the bigger picture, that you know your own body better than any textbook. Over the following Weeks as I recovered from my heart attack and adjusted to life with permanent cardiac damage, my relationship with my family underwent a fundamental shift. The dynamic that had characterized my entire life, my reports of illness being met with skepticism and dismissal, could no longer continue in the face of such obvious evidence that my perceptions had been accurate all along. Mom struggled the most with this new reality. As a physician, she was accustomed to being the final authority on medical matters. Acknowledging that she had misdiagnosed her own daughter for years, potentially contributing to a life-threatening delay in treatment, challenged her professional identity in profound ways. She began seeing a therapist, something I learned from Dad rather than from her directly. Apparently, she was wrestling with what her therapist called expert bias, the tendency for highly knowledgeable professionals to dismiss possibilities that don't fit their expectations or experience. She keeps saying she should have known, Dad told me during one of his visits, that a cardiologist should have recognized cardiac symptoms, even in a young woman. She's having a hard time forgiving herself. I found myself in the unexpected position of feeling sympathy for Mom even as I processed my own anger about years of dismissed concerns. Her misdiagnosis hadn't been malicious. It had been based on statistical probabilities and standard medical thinking that heart disease in young women was extremely unlikely. But the impact on me had been the same regardless of her intentions. My recovery was slower than anticipated. The heart attack had damaged a significant portion of my left ventricle, leaving me with reduced cardiac function that would affect my energy levels and exercise tolerance for the rest of my life. Simple activities like climbing stairs left me breathless, and I had to learn to pace myself through daily routines that had once been automatic. The job I had been supposed to start after graduation was understanding when I explained my medical situation, holding the position open while I completed cardiac rehabilitation. Alex had delayed her own post-graduation plans to help me through the initial recovery period, becoming an advocate in medical settings when I still felt too vulnerable to push back against dismissive treatment myself. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after my heart attack, Mom asked if she could visit me at my apartment. She looked nervous when I opened the door, holding a manila folder that she set on my coffee table before sitting down. "I've been doing some research," she said, opening the folder to reveal printed medical articles and studies about fibromuscular dysplasia, about cardiac symptoms in young women, about diagnostic bias in emergency medicine. I listened as she walked through what she had learned, how young women with heart attacks are more likely to be misdiagnosed as having anxiety or panic attacks, how racial and gender biases affect medical treatment, how even experienced physicians can fall into the trap of dismissing unlikely but serious conditions. I found a study, she continued, that showed women under 30 who present to emergency rooms with chest pain are 6 times more likely to be sent home without proper cardiac evaluation compared to men the same age with identical symptoms. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the research paper spread across my table. "Because I want you to understand that what happened to you wasn't just personal failure on my part, though it was that, too. It was part of a larger pattern in medicine that dismisses women's pain and symptoms. And I want you to know that I'm working to change how I practice because of what I learned from almost losing you." She went on to explain that she had begun speaking at medical conferences about diagnostic bias, using our story as a case study in how assumptions about gender and age can lead to life-threatening misdiagnoses. She had also implemented new protocols in her own practice for evaluating chest pain in young women, ensuring that cardiac causes were thoroughly investigated rather than dismissed. "I can't change what happened," she said finally. "I can't give you back the years when you didn't feel believed or reverse the damage to your heart. But I can try to prevent it from happening to other young women who come to me with symptoms that seem unlikely, but might be real." It was the closest thing to a genuine apology I had ever received from her, and it felt like a foundation we might be able to build on. 6 months after my heart attack, I was finally able to return to work, albeit with accommodations for my reduced cardiac function. My employer had been incredibly supportive, allowing me to work flexible hours and providing ergonomic adjustments to minimize physical strain. Alex had found a job in the same city, and we decided to continue living together, an arrangement that provided both companionship and practical help during my ongoing recovery. My relationship with my family had evolved into something more honest, if more complex. Dad and I grew closer as he worked to overcome years of automatically deferring to medical authority instead of trusting his parental instincts. Sophia used her experience of being wrong about my condition to become a more thoughtful pre-med student, one who understood that medical knowledge without humility and empathy could be dangerous. Mom and I began having regular conversations about my health that were collaborative rather than dismissive. She learned to ask about my symptoms without immediately analyzing or explaining them away, and I learned to share my concerns without the defensive armor I had developed from years of being disbelieved. It wasn't the relationship either of us had originally imagined, but it was built on a foundation of mutual respect that had been missing before. One evening, as I was reading about support groups for young adults with heart disease, I came across an online forum where young women shared stories of being dismissed by healthcare providers when reporting cardiac symptoms. Story after story echoed my own experience. Chest pain attributed to anxiety, racing heart dismissed as stress, episodes of breathlessness explained away as panic attacks. I realized that my story wasn't unique. Countless young women were experiencing what I had experienced, having their legitimate medical concerns dismissed because of age and gender assumptions that made serious cardiac conditions seem impossible, rather than just improbable. I began sharing my story in these forums, encouraging other women to advocate for themselves and seek second opinions when their concerns were dismissed. I emphasized that while anxiety and stress could certainly cause physical symptoms, the assumption that all cardiac complaints in young women were psychological could be life-threatening. Trust yourself, I would tell them, echoing the advice I wished I had followed years earlier. You know your body better than anyone else. If something feels wrong, keep pushing until you get answers that make sense. Many of the women I connected with online had similar stories. Years of symptoms that were explained away, followed by serious diagnoses that could have been caught earlier with proper investigation. Some had been luckier than me, receiving proper diagnosis before permanent damage occurred. Others had suffered heart attacks, strokes, or other serious complications that might have been prevented with earlier recognition of their symptoms. Through these connections, I began to understand that my experience was part of a larger pattern in healthcare that systematically undervalues women's self-reported symptoms. The solution wasn't just individual advocacy, though that was important. It was changing medical education, clinical protocols, and cultural attitudes that made dismissing women's pain seem reasonable and appropriate. A year after my heart attack, I was invited to speak at a medical conference about patient advocacy and diagnostic bias. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of physicians, I felt a mix of nervousness and determination. 18 months ago, I began. I was a 22-year-old college student who had been experiencing cardiac symptoms for years: racing heart, chest pain, episodes of breathlessness and dizziness. Every time I reported these symptoms to my family, who included a cardiologist, I was told they were caused by stress, anxiety, or attention-seeking behavior. I paused, looking directly at the cardiologists in the front row. On my graduation day, I collapsed during the ceremony with crushing chest pain and difficulty breathing. Even as I lay unconscious on the ground, my mother, a respected cardiologist, insisted to paramedics that I was having a panic attack. The delay in recognizing my symptoms as cardiac in nature allowed me to sustain permanent heart damage that could have been prevented. I went on to describe the rare genetic condition that had caused my heart attack, the years of dismissed symptoms that had preceded it, and the ongoing impact on my health and life. But more importantly, I talked about the systemic issues that had contributed to my misdiagnosis. The assumption that young women don't have heart attacks is statistically reasonable, I continued. But when that assumption becomes so rigid that it prevents proper evaluation of concerning symptoms, it becomes dangerous. I nearly died because the people responsible for my care couldn't see past their expectations to recognize what was actually happening to my body. The response from the medical community was mixed, but largely positive. Many physicians approached me afterward to share their own stories of diagnostic challenges and to discuss ways they were working to address bias in their practices. Some admitted that my presentation had made them reconsider how they evaluated symptoms in young female patients. Mom was in the audience that day, sitting in the back row. Afterward, she approached me with tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "For surviving, for fighting back, for trying to prevent this from happening to other young women. And I'm sorry it took almost losing you for me to understand how wrong I was." It was the full apology I had been waiting for, and it felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. As I approached the 2-year anniversary of my heart attack, I reflected on how much my life had changed. Physically, I had adapted to my new limitations. I took cardiac medications daily, exercised within carefully monitored parameters, and had regular cardiology appointments to track my heart function. The freedom and energy of my early 20s were gone, replaced by a more careful, measured approach to physical activity. But emotionally and psychologically, I had gained something invaluable: absolute trust in my own perceptions and experiences. The years of being told that my symptoms weren't real had taught me to doubt myself in fundamental ways. Nearly dying because of that doubt had forced me to reclaim my voice and my right to be believed. I had also found purpose in advocacy. Through speaking engagements, online forums, and mentoring other young women navigating dismissive healthcare systems, I was working to ensure that fewer people would experience what I had experienced. The work was emotionally demanding, but deeply fulfilling. Alex and I had both found romantic partners who understood and supported our friendship and my health challenges. My boyfriend Marcus was a nurse who brought both personal and professional insight to our relationship. He never questioned when I said I needed to rest or when I was concerned about a new symptom, and his medical background helped him understand the ongoing nature of my condition. The relationship with my family had stabilized into something healthier than it had ever been before. Dad and I talked weekly, and he had become one of my strongest advocates, encouraging me to speak up about health concerns and never minimizing my experiences. Sophia had graduated from her pre-med program and was applying to medical schools with a clear focus on learning to listen to patients and avoid the diagnostic biases that had nearly cost me my life. Mom and I maintained a cautious but genuine relationship. She consulted with me before making significant changes to her practice protocols, and I sometimes helped her prepare presentations about diagnostic bias and patient advocacy. We would never have the easy, uncomplicated relationship I had once hoped for, but we had built something honest and respectful in its place. One evening, while reviewing applications for a scholarship I had established for young women pursuing careers in healthcare advocacy, I came across a letter that stopped me cold. It was from a 19-year-old whose story was eerily similar to mine. Years of cardiac symptoms dismissed as anxiety, family members who insisted she was being dramatic, and a recent diagnosis of a rare heart condition that had nearly killed her. "Reading your story online saved my life," she wrote. "When I collapsed at work and my supervisor said I was just having a panic attack, I remembered what you said about trusting yourself and demanding proper evaluation. I insisted they call an ambulance instead of just letting me rest in the break room. The ER doctors found that I was having a heart attack caused by a coronary artery anomaly. They said if I had waited even another hour, I probably wouldn't have survived." I had to put the letter down and take several deep breaths before continuing to read. This young woman was alive because my story had given her the courage to advocate for herself when everyone around her was dismissing her symptoms. The scholarship application had become secondary to the realization that sharing my experience was literally saving lives. I called Alex, reading her the letter through tears of relief and validation. "This is why you're doing this work," she said, gently. "This is why it mattered that you survived and found your voice. You're preventing other people from going through what you went through." That weekend, I drove home to visit my family, something I now did regularly without the anxiety and dread that had once accompanied trips home. Mom was in her garden when I arrived, tending to the roses she had planted the spring after my heart attack. She looked up as I approached, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure at seeing me. "How was your week?" she asked, pulling off her gardening gloves. I told her about the scholarship applications, including the letter from the young woman who had advocated for herself during her heart attack. Mom listened intently, her expression shifting between pride and sadness. "I keep thinking about all the patients I might have dismissed over the years," she said when I finished. "Young women who came to me with symptoms I explained away instead of investigating properly. I wonder how many of them had serious conditions that went undiagnosed because I couldn't see past my assumptions." "You can't change the past," I reminded her, using words she had said to me months earlier. "But you're working to prevent it from happening in the future. That matters." She nodded, but I could see the weight of regret in her eyes. Mom carried the burden of knowing that her diagnostic approach had nearly killed her own daughter, And that knowledge had fundamentally changed how she practiced medicine and how she moved through the world. As we sat in the garden that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. 2 years earlier, I had been a college student whose family dismissed her health concerns as psychological manifestations of stress and anxiety. I had internalized their doubt to such a degree that I nearly died before receiving proper medical treatment. Now, I was a heart attack survivor, patient advocate, and public speaker who used her experience to educate healthcare providers and empower other young women to trust their own perceptions. The road between those two versions of myself had been painful, frightening, and marked by permanent physical limitations that would affect the rest of my life. But it had also been a journey towards self-trust, authentic relationships, and meaningful purpose. I had learned that being believed was not something I needed to earn through perfect symptoms or dramatic presentations. It was something I deserved simply by virtue of being human and having experiences that mattered. The young woman who had collapsed at her college graduation had nearly died because the people who should have protected her had taught her to doubt herself instead. The woman sitting in the garden 2 years later knew that her perceptions were valid, her voice was important, and her story had the power to save lives. As I prepared to drive back to the city that evening, Mom walked me to my car and hugged me tightly. "I love you," she said, "and I'm grateful every day that you survived my mistakes." "I love you too," I replied, meaning it completely for the first time in years. The drive home gave me time to process the conversation and the continued evolution of our relationship. I thought about the young women who would read my story, hear my speeches, or connect with me through online forums. Some of them would find the courage to advocate for themselves in medical settings where their concerns might otherwise be dismissed. Some would push for second opinions when their symptoms were explained away. Some would insist on proper evaluation instead of accepting psychological explanations for physical distress. And some of them would live because of it. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "How was the family visit? Ready for dinner when you get home?" I smiled, appreciating the simple normalcy of the message. He would ask about my day, listen to my reflections on the scholarship applications and the conversation with Mom, and remind me to take my evening medications without making me feel like a burden or an invalid. On my way home, I texted back, "Good visit. Looking forward to dinner and telling you about it." As I merged onto the highway that would take me back to my life in the city, I thought about the question I was often asked during speaking engagements. What would you tell your younger self if you could go back and change things? The answer was always the same. Trust yourself. Your body is telling you something important and you deserve to be believed. But I was also grateful in a complex way for the journey that had brought me to this point. Without the experience of being dismissed and nearly dying because of it, I never would have found my voice as an advocate. I never would have discovered the profound satisfaction of helping other young women navigate healthcare systems that too often discount their experiences. My heart attack had taken away some things: my easy physical confidence, my uncomplicated relationship with my family, my assumption that young people don't have serious health problems. But it had given me other things: unshakable self-trust, meaningful purpose, and the knowledge that survival could be transformed into service. The dashboard clock showed 8:30 p.m. as I pulled into my driveway. Marcus was waiting on the front porch, and Alex waved from her upstairs window. These people who believed me, who had never questioned my experiences or dismissed my concerns, had become my chosen family. Inside the house, over dinner, I shared the letter from the scholarship applicant, whose life had been saved by reading my story. Marcus and Alex listened with the kind of attention that communicated deep respect for both my experience and my ongoing work. "You should frame that letter," Alex suggested. "It's proof that everything you went through wasn't meaningless. You're literally preventing other people from experiencing what you experienced." Later that evening, as I took my cardiac medications and checked my heart rate monitor, routines that had become as automatic as brushing my teeth, I thought about the young woman I had been 2 years earlier, the one who had graduated college, only to collapse from a massive heart attack that everyone insisted was anxiety. That young woman had nearly died because she had been taught not to trust herself. The woman I had become knew that her perceptions were valid, her experiences mattered, and her voice could save lives. The transformation had been purchased at a price I wouldn't wish on anyone: permanent heart damage, months of recovery, and the ongoing management of a chronic condition. But it had also given me something invaluable: the absolute certainty that I knew my own body and that my experiences deserved to be believed. As I settled into bed that night, I thought about the scholarship recipient who had advocated for herself during her heart attack, the medical conference attendees who had committed to examining their own diagnostic biases, and the countless young women who would read my story and find the courage to trust themselves. My heart attack had nearly silenced me forever. Instead, it had given me a voice that could help ensure other young women's voices would be heard. And for that unexpected gift, despite everything it had cost me, I found myself grateful. Have you ever experienced a situation where your health concerns were dismissed or minimized? How did you find the courage to advocate for yourself? Share your stories in the comments below, and remember that your experiences are valid and your voice matters. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might need to hear that they deserve to be believed. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it helps you trust your own instincts when it comes to your health and well-being.